Welcome to the Reddit Chronicles. Today we will be reading from True Off My Chest. Our first post is by Chris Levin. Shave my head, my wife cried all night and won't look at me anymore. Hi everyone, I'm a M33 and I feel like I need to share this with someone. This was the day before yesterday. We had just had a long talk about our financial situation and I pointed out that we could save some money if I would just shave my head instead of going to the barber shop. She agreed that it would indeed save us some money, and so I decided that I would go about it the same evening since my hair was getting on my nerves. Said and done. We have a trimmer at home, and it took me about 15 minutes. I'm quite good looking and never had any issues with the ladies in any way. But when I got out of the bathroom feeling quite good about myself, she wouldn't look at me. I laughed, of course, thought she was just being silly. So I hugged her from behind, took her hand and put it on my head. She immediately took it back and shivered, whereas I too took a step back. She then started crying and kept on doing so the entire night. At first I felt devastated that my wife would react this way to something that I was feeling quite good about. We tried talking about it that same night, and she felt ashamed about how she reacted and still couldn't help it. We eventually held each other and fell asleep. The next day I got home from work and I noticed she wouldn't look at me. I got more and more annoyed as the evening progressed until I went to bed, alone. The next day, I texted her from work explaining why I seemed irritated last night, and she still replies that she understands and feels ashamed of her behavior. And I'm not having it. If something as trivial as a haircut can make someone who claims to love you go completely bananas, then that's their problem. I fully understand that people have preferences, but what the actual heck? We've been married for several years and she's always been into me in every way. Now, English isn't my first language, so I apologize in advance for any grammatical errors. Just wanted to vent this and figured that this sub would be a good place to do so. So, does anyone have any suggestions on what I should do next? She is right now wondering why it feels like someone died at home and why I seem uninterested in talking to her. Our next post is by Responsible Run. Some cute guy's date didn't show up, so my bestie and I decided to step in. Me, F22, and my best friend, F23, went to a local restaurant for dinner. The restaurant was a bit more expensive, but we both had to celebrate finishing and passing our final exams, so the price was secondary for us. As we were choosing our food, my best friend noticed a cute guy sitting by himself watching the door. He was very dressed up, and you could tell that he had put a lot of time and effort into his appearance. He also had a bouquet of flowers. Every now and then, the waiters came up to him and asked what he wanted to order, but he said he was waiting for someone. We decided to ignore it for the time being. As the restaurant was relatively full, we had to wait a long time for our food and we noticed that he was still waiting. He was now looking at his smartphone more often, and his look told us that the evening wasn't going according to plan for him. He seemed unsettled and nervous, and kept alternating between looking at the front door and his smartphone. My best friend is also super empathetic in situations like this, and she was embarrassed that she got tears in her eyes because of it. At some point he did order, but he looked disappointed and sad. We realized that his date probably didn't show up. My best friend and I exchanged a few glances and then we decided to speak to him. We asked him if we could sit with him. He was surprised. We explained that we had been watching him for a while. He was a little embarrassed but agreed to let us sit with him. He was a super sweet guy. He told us that his crush had asked him out on a date, but she had texted him a few minutes ago that she had only done it because she lost a bet. But she never planned to show up on the date. We talked for a really long time, ate together, and at the end he split the bouquet he had put together himself so that both me and my best friend got a bouquet. He even drove us home afterwards. He was a real gentleman and not only paid for the meal, but also opened the car door for us. Afterwards he thanked us for the lovely evening. Then he gave us his number, and I'm really glad how that turned out. We were able to save him from a bad evening, and I wouldn't mind seeing him again because the evening with him was really nice. Our next post is by Jew Plenty. I learned today that my grandparents are siblings. My grandmother told me a family secret and it left me speechless. I don't know how to react. I don't know how to absorb it. My mind is so clouded. My moral compass is cracked. I don't know if I can recover from this. Her confession gave light on why they don't have a biological child. I have 4 uncles and 5 aunties. My dad is their child. It never crossed my mind to ask why does my grandparents oddly look like each other. My grandmother mentioned it to me because I talked shit about an acquaintance that fell in love with her own aunt. They didn't know but continued the relationship even after knowing. She said my grandfather was her literal older brother, but they didn't grow up in the same house until they were 10 years old, since she was my great-grandfather's bastard. They oddly fell in love, then eloped, changed their names, got married and adopted 10 children. She said without sexual reproduction, they're no different from regular lovers. I honestly never felt any toxicity on our family, no conflicts with any members whatsoever. 10 of my grandparents' children were kind to one another, and my grandparents were sweet. They cared for each other, for their children, for their grandchildren. People in our community loves them wholeheartedly. I thought our family was perfect, but she reveals this to me. I told my dad and said she was joking, but my dad just said, "So you knew now why they adopted us?" I was silenced. I can't say anything against them because I knew for a fact that all of my uncles and aunts were street orphans and my grandparents gave them a loving home. I'm conflicted with this fact and I can't bottle it up, so I'm letting it off here. I guess I am ready for the Lannister jokes. Our next post is by Fresh Blue. I think my now ex-girlfriend broke my daughter. I am 34, am a single dad to my daughter, F10. It's just my daughter and I. The daughter's bio mom just isn't involved in the daughter's life, which is honestly for the best. One thing to know about my daughter is she has ADHD, and when she talks it tends to be fast and a lot. Something I've grown very used to and love about my daughter. So for the past 10 months, I've been dating this woman, let's call Jo, 33. Jo and I were doing great. She knew I had a daughter who I have full-time and had no issues with me having a kid. Since the relationship had been going well, I decided it was time for Jo and my daughter to meet. We went out to a restaurant and everything was good. Both of them seemed to get along well. Jo decided to come over Saturday, and we were going to just have lunch and spend some time with my daughter so she and Jo can get to know each other. Well, as we were making lunch, my daughter was going on about a TV show she has been watching and was rambling about that, occasionally getting sidetracked and talking about different things as well. My daughter had went upstairs for a moment. When she did, Jo looked extremely annoyed. I asked what's wrong. She said my daughter talks a lot. I explained she does have ADHD and tends to ramble when she talks, and she talks a lot when she gets into something, and I said it's just who my daughter is. Then Jo said, "Well, can't you get her to shut up?" In that moment, my daughter walked downstairs and heard what Jo said. She looked absolutely heartbroken. I told Jo she needs to leave, and she was trying to justify what she said. But I just told her this isn't going to work out if she can't accept my daughter and her little quirks that make her her. She said, "Well, it's just the talking, it's too much," I said. "Then looks like we are done," and she left. Since then, my daughter has barely talked more than a word or two at a time, even with me starting conversations about things I know she enjoys. I letting her know I enjoy listening to her talk. I do. I don't know how long she will keep this up. I know hearing that hurt my daughter. Thank you for listening to the Reddit Chronicles. Follow for more content.